Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game. I'm Kevin Day and he is Liverpool University's cheeriest elf, Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I hope that hello didn't sound too loud there and that Guy remembered to put the music in at the start of the pod this week. He has one job, Kieran, one job.
He has another job, which is counting his money.
He has two jobs, Kieran, and of course the money counting obviously took preference over the putting music on me. Now, Kieran, you remember last week we told that brilliant story about these Sunderland fans who had set up a soup kitchen to help feed people in the area who are struggling to feed themselves at this difficult time. And as we approach the season of goodwill, Kieran, my favourite time of year, we thought it was a good idea to name and praise all the many other clubs whose fans are going the extra mile to help their communities at this difficult time for many. So step forward, Walsall fans, Wycombe fans, AFC Wimbledon fans and Millwall fans, all doing brilliant things this Christmas for their community. And we'll name plenty more as we head for 2021. And no offence, 2020, but we can't wait. We put a little tweet out asking for clubs or asking for fans to tell us what their clubs are doing. As we suspected, Kieran, we were flooded with responses. So we're going to read more out on every pod that we do before Christmas. And of course, once again, to start on a positive note, we weren't at all surprised that so many fans were doing so many things for their people in their community.
No, and I think this reflects the fact that as fans, we do see our football club as sort of as a central beacon of the town or city, and we come together at a time when there's an awful lot of people living pretty grim lives with not a lot to look forward to. So to all those fans for the clubs we've named and to all the others we will name in due course, keep up the great work.
Yeah, and these are all fans doing things over and above what the clubs are already doing. So this is, I can't stress enough that this is fans we're talking about here. Now, Kieran, before we get on to some, surprisingly, I almost use the word smorgasbord of questions, Kieran, because they cover a range of, including one proper accounting question that I nearly had to phone you up to make sure I was writing it down right. We have a couple of news stories. The first one is a biggie. The EFL has named its new chief executive.
Yes, so the EFL are taking on Trevor Birch. Trevor is a former footballer, which is a positive. He then became a chartered accountant with Ernst & Young. So he's a 62-year-old chartered accountant. He's
down with the kids, eh?
Yes. And he was recruited by Rick Parry, a 65-year-old chartered accountant, also formerly of Ernst & Young. So he has been involved in the football industry. He's been chief executive of Leeds. He was at Chelsea for a year. He was at Everton for 6 weeks before he resigned. He was at Derby. He was Sheffield United. He then dipped his toe into the world of administration. He was the administrator for Portsmouth. He sold Hearts to their supporters groups. He then went back to being a chair or chief executive again at Portsmouth. And his last couple of jobs, he was at Swansea, and we're going to come back to Swansea a little bit later. Yeah. He lasted just over a year there. Then he went to Spurs, and he picked up sort of a director of football operations role. He started that on the 1st of September 2020, and now within 3 months he's now left to join the EFL. So he certainly gets around a bit, and this is all on the back of the previous chief executive, Dave Baldwin, who Dave resigned after 4 months in the job, saying it was a different environment inside the EFL to the one he remembers. That's not fulsome praise. And then yesterday, Matt Hughes in the Mail, he put up a story about the recruitment process, and we've spoken before about the recruitment process for Greg Clark's replacement.
Absolutely.
And according to Matt Hughes, there's been no transparent recruitment process. We've got a 62-year-old accountant, and this was managed solely by Rick Parry. Right. So it wasn't a committee. Nobody else involved. No independent directors. Managed solely by Rick Parry. So that's where we are. So they're both former accountants at Ernst & Young. They're both in their 60s. If I was aspirational, if we're trying to get more diversity in the game, things of that nature, doesn't look like the EFL's the best place to go.
And no disrespect to chartered accountants, of course, Kieran, you know full well my esteemed opinion of that profession and all those who take part in it. But as you say, it's slightly dispiriting because it's a little like it's the football manager's merry-go-round. Basically, you're not out of a job for long, are you? If you're a football career administrator, and basically these jobs all seem to go to an increasingly small pool of people. And the fact that they're not even looking outside that increasingly small pool of middle-aged white male people for candidates it's just very frustrating. When nearly every other large organisation in the country is obliged basically to look at other people and some people do it just to pay lip service. But the fact that this is the EFL, I would imagine that 35% of the players in the EFL are Afro-Caribbean, black origin, and it's just none of them are getting anywhere near even being considered for this sort of role. Never mind. We could do the whole pod on this, Kieran, but let's not. Let's go to Scotland, which is increasingly becoming my happy place. I have to say, seriously, a friend of mine, ex-comedian, who lives in Edinburgh, keeps sending me pictures of him and his dog walking around Edinburgh. It's like, please stop doing that. The Scottish government has announced a £55 million funding package for spectator sport, including football. I mean, apart from racing and rugby, I'm struggling to think what other spectator sports there could be. But this is a good news story for once. I was up quite late watching the Anthony Joshua fight last night. It's a good news story for once for football, isn't it?
I think there certainly are some positives here. Of the £55 million package, £30 million has gone to football, some has gone to rugby, netball and basketball. So a couple of other sort of more niche sports have got. We're talking 100,000 or 200,000. I think it's especially good for the clubs in the lower league. So as far as the Premiership is concerned, it's £20 million, but it's in the form of loans rather than grants. And those are at commercial interest rates. Now, the clubs in the Premiership, by all accounts, aren't particularly happy with this. They say, as we've said on more than one occasion on the show, Scotland generates more money from ticket sales than any other country in Europe. And you've got clubs such as Rangers who despite getting into Europe and the benefits there, they still are reliant upon matchday income for 60% of their total revenue. They also have to pay, under the government rules to allow football to take place, they've got the costs of testing twice weekly to incur on top of the lack of revenue. So they're not overly chuffed, but it's buying them some time, which is the important thing. Once we drop into the smaller divisions, a bit like the deal that the Premier League has granted to the EFL clubs, it's in the form of grants rather than loans, which is great because grants, in theory, provided you comply with the terms, are not repayable. That includes the Highlands League, that includes Scottish women's game. So I think clubs are, by all accounts, quite pleased with that. Would they like more? Of course. If you give a choice between less money or more money, you'd always want more. But yes, in general, I think this is a bit of a lifeline, and it will keep those clubs ticking over a bit longer until we are all hoping that the vaccine is a success, and the current restrictions on our lifestyles will be relaxed and diluted over the course of the forthcoming months.
Now, I'm aware, Kieran, having spent some time in Scotland, that however I pronounce the name of this next football team, somebody will complain. But I'm very firmly in the Greenock camp. So Greenock Morton's manager has quit to save the club money.
Yes, I think he's an ex-Palace player, David Hopkin.
Yeah, scored the winning goal for us in the playoff final against Sheffield United in the last kick of the game. Yep.
So, Greenock Morton, I'll go for the consistent approach here, or Morton, to save myself getting it wrong. They're a club. They've lost £4 million in total, and they were losing money pre-COVID, so they weren't in a brilliant position. They were owned by a company called Golden Casket, who make sweets. Okay, so they're a confectioner. So why on earth they bought a football club as well is it seems a strange thing to do. But the good news is that they are in the process of selling the club to the fans. And writing off all the debt. So these are, this is manna from heaven as far as I'm concerned, and as far as our sort of the values we have on the pod.
Yeah.
And David Hopkins popped in towards the back end of last week, had a chat with the chairman, and they were looking at budgets and they say, we've got problems. We're handing across the club to the fans relatively shortly. And they're trying to find ways of saving money. So by all accounts, David Hopkins says, well, one of the things we can do is for me to take leave of my job. Now, I think he's possibly got something lined up, but even so, it's, as the chairman said, this is a selfless act. He could have stuck around. So, at a time of wrong-uns that we sadly have to speak about too often in the game, this is a positive and fair play to David.
Yeah, he was a very good player for us. I remember, I can't remember which person in the opposition once said about him, he was the easiest player to man mark because he was so ginger. It's impossible not to let him slip. Now, Kieran, it's question time. And my first question, Kieran, is addressed to you. I've just realised, Kieran, that all my questions are addressed to you, to be perfectly honest, in a technical sort of way. But on a personal note to you, Kieran, do you know the nationality of the young lady who's just moved into the house across the road from me?
I don't.
Right. Would you like to guess where she might be from?
Russia?
I got so excited just now. I came out of my house as she came out of hers, and she waved and said hello, and we went and stood in the middle of the road, which is very quiet at the moment because of the thing. And she said, "Oh, I like your Christmas decoration." I said, "Thank you very much." I said, "Where are you from?" She said, "Russia." And then I noticed that under her coat she had a blue and white scarf on. So that already got me. And then I asked her name, and I ran back into the house and said to Ali, "You'll never guess what the name of that girl, the Russian girl across the road is." And she went, "Katerina." I went, "Oh," because I was 100% convinced she said Kieran. In my head, I heard Kieran. I thought, this is the best story ever. She's got a blue and white scarf on, and she's Kieran. And Nellie went, I think that's probably the green scarf if it's the one she had on. So in the space of 15 seconds, I was completely deflated. It was I couldn't run. I was such a childish way. I can't wait for the pod. In fact, I almost WhatsApped you there and then. Anyway. My first question, Kieran, is addressed to you, like all the rest of them. It comes from Chris Barker. And Chris says, Coventry sold Callum Wilson to Bournemouth for around £3 million with various add-ons, including 10% of the profit on any future transfer. Now, this has been a popular topic on the show recently, Kieran. Newcastle bought Wilson for £20 million. So, Chris Barker says, Coventry are due around £1.7 million. Do Bournemouth pay that in full straight away, or do they pay it in instalments in line with how Newcastle are paying Bournemouth?
Right. This is a tricky one here because it will depend upon the individual contractual terms. I mean, Bournemouth will certainly have to pay the VAT within 3 months in terms of the deal, regardless of the speed at which Newcastle pay. If it was built into the contract that as soon as the sale takes place, then that becomes an obligation, then Bournemouth would have to hand that money across to Coventry. If Bournemouth, however, had silver-tongued friends helping them to draft the contract, who says that any profits will be on the basis of future cash flows in respect of the sale of Callum Wilson, it will be linked to the instalments payable by Newcastle. So it very much depends on a contract-by-contract basis. Okay.
Well, a similar question comes from Darren Holland in Dublin, who's given us a bit of a backstory. And after in these days of nearly always bad news, I'm very pleased to read the backstory out, Kieran, because Darren Holland in Dublin is an elated Bohemians fan, he says. And after the club going from the brink of extinction at the start of the decade to qualifying for Europe at the back end of it, it's been a roller coaster ride at Dalymount Park. I then broke off for 5 minutes because I'm determined to find something other than roller coaster to illustrate an up and down sensation. Anyway, now we get to the nub of Darren's question. Darren says, we are due 10% of the sell-on fee following our former player Matt Doherty's move to Spurs, which for Bohemians is an astronomical sum. The question is, do clubs pay tax on this?
Yes, they do, because what you're actually selling, it's not the sale of the player, it's the sale of the player's registration certificates, and that is deemed to be an intangible asset. If you sell such an asset at a profit, then that will go into your taxable profit. So potentially there could be some tax to pay on this. The intricacies of the Irish tax system are beyond me. It's many years since I last taught tax, and so therefore, whether they'll get some allowances in respect of that, because it's taken a number of years before the sell-on fee becomes due. That could be one way of reducing tax, and there could be other bits and pieces as well. So
actually, Kieran, that raises an important distinction for me. So we often get asked, will that transfer fee get is there tax on that, blah, blah. So there's no tax on the individual transaction as such, is there? These transactions just go towards the annual accounts, the profit of which is then taxed. Is that right?
That's perfectly correct. Yes, because you look at the collective in terms of the transactions in a year, and it will be based on the annual accounts, which then get submitted to the equivalent of Companies House in Ireland and submitted to the Irish tax authorities. It's a bit like if you or I do a bit of freelance work. Does that get taxed separately? No, it goes into your annual income, and that forms the basis for your annual tax liabilities.
Not if I get paid cash, it doesn't. I didn't say that out loud. I did not say that out loud. While we're talking about tax, and it's almost like producer guy's been paying attention this week, because our next question is from, I'm going to go full Spanish for this, Jaime Aparicio, who says he's from, if it's James Aparicio, I'm sorry, it's both to Jaime and James. Jaime says he's in sunny Spain. So hello to you from cloudy Croydon, Jaime. Jaime says, could you please explain to all foreigners listening to this pod how taxation works in the UK? I suspect we haven't got the full amount of time, Kieran, to do that. But this question starts dull, but it just gets better and better as far as I'm concerned. Somebody says, I've seen accounts of teams such as Peterborough not having to pay taxes and bringing payments forward. If it helps, the details are in note 11 on the latest annual report from the Posh. And what makes me laugh is guys put ... because I suspect he doesn't know how you're going to... You may have seen a brilliant docudrama on the BBC on Friday about Barbara Windsor, God rest her soul, who I met several times and was very fond of. But there's a very famous story from her past when the first time she met Kenneth Williams, and Kenneth Williams had a go at her, and she was incredibly rude back. And there was a 5-second pause while everyone expected an outburst, and Kenneth laughed and decided he loved this woman dearly. And I think that Guy might be thinking, he doesn't know how you're going to react to somebody telling you that the details are in note 11 on the latest annual report from the Posh, because I just had this vision of you going straight to it, desperately hoping it was in note 12 or 10. So you can pull rank on that.
That is rock and roll in my lifestyle, Kevin, we both know.
Anyway, is there a short answer to the question from our friend in sunny Spain?
Yes. First of all, hi to Yame. I have taught Yame.
Oh, so, there you go. Thank you.
In terms of the way that things work, is that if a club, let's say a club lost money in 3 years and then in year 4 made a profit, what you're allowed to do is to offset the losses in the early years against your profits in year 4. So that's what Peterborough have been doing. And the Peterborough business model is very much based on player trading, which tends to be quite volatile. So they might not sell a player at a big profit for a couple of years, and then in year 3 they do. So they tend to go sort of loss, profit, and so on. So you're allowed to carry losses back. You're allowed to carry your losses forwards and knock them off against future profits. That's normally for the first £5 million and then 50% of the balance. And if you've got other businesses and you're within a group, you can claim something called group relief. Don't Google that, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. That might I might get in trouble for that. But those are the broad rules. So if you've made losses historically, you can offset those losses against your future profits, and that's what Posh have done.
Thank you for that question, Hammer. It's slightly worrying, Kieran, that you taught him and he still needs to ask me what the answer is to a tax question, but there you go. Adam Brooks takes us from Spain to the USA, and in particular, the business strategy of the MLS. Now, you know my respect for all the questions we get, Kieran, but this one I thought was a very interesting one. David Beckham, says Adam Brooks, recently purchased the Inter Miami franchise at a discount. Where does the money that it takes to buy a franchise go in terms of the way it is distributed across the US football ecosystem?
Right. So the MLS owns all of the football clubs officially. So the money goes into a central pot. Now David Beckham, as Adam said, bought Inter Miami at a ridiculously low price of $25 million. To give you some sort of benchmark, the Charlotte franchise has just been sold for $325. Apparently David Beckham got it because he's an ex-player, or I think this was actually part of the initial deal to get him to go across to play in the MLS. We'll allow you to play, and by the way, we'll give you a real knockdown price.
Oh, okay.
Now, the reason why they pay these are what's referred to as expansion fees, and the MLS, which started off very small, is now up to 30 clubs. And what you're paying for scarcity value. You're paying for exclusivity in terms of American football. And whilst it might seem $325 million is a lot of money, it's a hell of a lot cheaper for those people who want to get into American sport and who don't fancy trying to buy an NBA or an NFL franchise, because those are sealed leagues. The MLS has increased. It's gone up from 21 to 30 clubs in the last few years, so there is scope to grow the league. And clearly, there's a lot of money in the NFL and the NBA and so on, but those individual sports or franchise sports have said, we are not going to get any bigger. So therefore, the cost of buying them, we're talking in the billions. So this money goes into a central pot, and then that money is distributed to effectively the existing franchise holders, as you would normally do in a franchise or operation. So it's a strange way of doing it, but it does discourage the Steve Dales of this world, because you've got to go and pay a large sum. And there's 4 criteria the MLS use when allocating a franchise. First of all, they go into detail in terms of the owner wealth, i.e. can you afford to run the club initially? Secondly, does it have a stadium or approval for a stadium? And you've got to demonstrate control over money-making issues such as parking and concessions. Then they look at the size of the town involved, and then they try to establish whether there's some sort of established fan base. So are there local universities and colleges where a lot of football is being played? So they do seem to go through some quite tough criteria, because what they don't want to do is to end up with the situation which you and I can remember, when the likes of Pele and Rodney Marsh and George Best went across to the States, and then it all had an almighty crash, and the MLS had to start again from scratch.
So if the money that David Beckham spent is distributed amongst the existing franchise holders, does that mean that the existing franchise holders wouldn't be happy that he got such a huge discount then?
I think they'll be quite philosophical about it. David Beckham increased the profile of the game, right, a huge amount, and in America they're very keen on marketing and things of that nature. So this Inter Miami, which I think is starting playing, it started playing this year. They'll just see that as part of the overall cost of getting David Beckham to come to US football.
Okay. Kieran, we talk on this pod jokingly about the fact that barely a week goes by without mentioning Derby or Sheffield Wednesday. But in reality, I think Man United are the club that we probably talk about most. And we've got two questions now about Man United, both of which I think are very interesting. The first one comes from Paul Glover. And Paul says, can I ask Kieran what the sense is behind a club like Manchester United holding out for what, in the grand scheme of things, isn't a great deal of money extra for a transfer fee when they risk losing the deal and being stuck with a player's very high wages? As an example, Chris Smalling, they were haggling over a reported extra £5 million on the deal, which could have seen them stuck with a player they don't want, paying him a lot of money.
Right. I mean, I think in answer to Paul's question, Manchester United don't want to be seen, as do all clubs, as a soft touch.
Right.
So they've got a player who's not part of the manager's plans. Chris Smalling, he's just turned 31. Manchester United don't want to be seen to be setting a precedent. There's already a belief that United often pay over the odds for players because they're seen as being so wealthy. So what they don't want to be is known as a club that it buys high and sells low. That's not a good reflection. And also, Ed Woodward has a duty towards the shareholders. Manchester United is ultimately a company which is quoted on the New York Stock Exchange. And therefore he has a responsibility towards shareholders to deliver. So in respect of Chris Smalling, Roma took him on loan. Yeah, that covered a fair wodge of his wages. They paid a €3 million loan fee last season, and by all accounts, he was superb. Yeah. And on the back of that, they've agreed to pay €15 million, or £15 million. We're not quite sure the exact nature of the deal for a player who's 31. Potentially, that could go up to 20 million with add-ons. I guess that the selling club here at United were fully aware that Chris Smalling's had an excellent season in Roma, and therefore they stuck to their guns. There's certainly a lot of evidence within Europe that the buying clubs, as a result of COVID, think that they can get a bargain on everything. United don't need to sell. So, if it's a fire sale, then perhaps they would have taken a lower price, but they're not in a need to sell. They've got plenty of cash in the bank, and therefore they stuck out for this higher price. And I think they've got actually a pretty good deal for a player, remember, whom they only paid £10 million for a decade ago anyway.
Yeah, talk of the stock exchange leads us very nicely, thank you, Guy, to a question from Gax in Caithness, a topical question about Manchester United. And Gax says, talking about Mina Raiola's comments on Paul Pogba's unhappiness there last week, saying that he had to move on from Manchester United, are there legal implications around those comments, since the club are listed on the stock exchange and those comments could affect the value of an asset and therefore possibly the share price of the club?
Right. In terms of Gax's query, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is sort of the administrative governing body of listed companies in New York, is very, very strict as to what can be said by executives of the club or executives of the company or the company itself in terms of press releases and things of this nature. Because what they don't want to be doing is being found guilty of taking advantage of price-sensitive issues. Now, Mini Raiola is not an employee of Manchester United. So therefore, he is in a position as an agent to say whatever he wishes, just as you or I can with regards to Manchester United, provided, of course, it's not libelous or things of that nature. So if he is to say that he's the representative of somebody who he claims is not very happy and should be moved on, does that have an implication for the share price? Perhaps. I don't think it will have a huge implication, but he is perfectly at liberty to represent his client as he sees fit. And the status of Manchester United as a listed company is an irrelevance because he's not an executive there.
Okay. A couple of short, sharp questions now, and the first one comes from Cormac Turley. Do national teams have any kind of financial regulators like club football does?
It depends upon the nature of what they do and where they get funding from. If they are recipients of government funding, then it could be that they're answerable to the Minister for Sport or the sports department. Other than that, they are not answerable to anybody apart from FIFA. Because there will be general rules in terms of corporate behaviour, and also their bankers. So if we take the Football Association here in England, I believe they've just taken out a £175 million loan as part of the COVID loans, and there will be covenants attached to that. But there's no sort of there's no guarantee within an individual country. A football association to a certain extent is independent of scrutiny. Okay. And certainly, if we take a look at what's happened in the Republic of Ireland, that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yes. Phil Chater has asked you a nice accounting question. In a club's accounts, says Phil Chater, are player transfers individually displayed? And if so, are undisclosed fee transactions also displayed?
Right. As far as we're concerned here in the UK, individual transfers are not displayed. A bit like the tax query we had earlier, they are collated together. So you will see the total amount paid and the total amount received. And there's no obligation to go into any more depth. The FA does publish agents' fees, but again, not necessarily on a deal. In other countries, the rules are different. In my opinion, the best set of accounts of any club on the planet are those of Juventus, because they lay out on a transaction by transaction basis exactly what they've paid, exactly how much they've received, and they also show potentially how much the agents are getting on deals as well. So, we've just been talking about Mini Raiola. That's how we worked out that he picked up around about, I think it's about 28 million from Juventus for the Paul Pogba deal. He presumably also picked up something from Manchester United, and it could be that his client also paid him for the privilege of arranging the deal between the club that wanted to sell him, the club that wanted to buy him, and the player who wanted to move.
Yeah, I've probably asked you this question before, Kieran. We've done a lot of pods, but also we have a lot of new listeners, so I feel entitled to ask this. The business of undisclosed fees in the club accounts, presumably HMRC are within their rights to say, we would like you to disclose the fee to us.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. I've spoken to a few clubs about this, and they've always argued is that they don't want other clubs to know how much of their budget they've spent. Because we roughly know, how much Palace are going to spend, how much, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Manchester United. We got a rough idea of what we think the transfer budget's going to be. So clubs have said to me, we'd rather keep that quiet because it helps us in future negotiations. Having said that, whenever I want to find out a transfer fee, I just phone up one of my mates who's an agent, and they are. If you think the world of showbiz is full of gossip, football agents are the most loose-tongued of people I've met, which is fantastic. It's a bit like WhatsApp groups. What stays between agents or goes between agents stays between agents. But they've got all of the numbers there if ever you need them.
Well, if football agents gossip the way comedians do, you have to factor in the 30% exaggeration fee for a start off, don't you? In light of Hame's question earlier, actually, for our overseas listeners, I probably should explain that HMRC stands for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. Basically, they're our tax and VAT people, and I can say that with some confidence because I've had many a letter with those initials. In fact, it's slightly worrying.
Have you opened any?
I opened all of them, Kieran.
Right.
Then 3 years ago, I started to get Christmas cards from them, which is a very worrying development. Our next question is from Julie Hopkins, and I don't know why. I for some reason, I feel I should be humming a folk song after I say the name Julie Hopkins because it's a wonderful name. Julie has a slightly plaintive question. Can you please explain to me what's happening financially at Swansea City after relegation to the Championship? Are our owners wrong-uns? Although I would have to say that I imagine Julie is still floating on air after the Cardiff result yesterday, so she may not care what you say, to be perfectly honest.
I've taken a deep look at Swansea's finances, and for a club that's spent 7 years of the last decade, between 2010 and 2019 in the Premier League, also had 1 year of parachute payments, my assessment was that club was living beyond their means for most of that time. If you take the wages they paid, plus the amortization fees on transfers, that came to 98% of the total revenue they generated over the course of the decade, despite the fact they were having the benefits of all of these huge sums of TV money. So I don't think that the new owners are wrong ones. They've got a couple of new owners in Levine and Kaplan who are US based. What I would say about the new owners is they've not put money into the club. Which is, if you are a fan, that's what I've always said. What you want is a benign dictator, also a benign, generous dictator who's prepared to bankroll some of those losses. So I think what has happened with Swansea is that since they were relegated, there's very much been a fire sale, and they have been flogging off players quite regularly to try to make it ends meet. Now, that might be connected, going back to our first story, with Trevor Birch, who was the chief there, and his brief was very much to get some of the excess expenditure off the books. And I've looked at comments from Swansea Supporters Trust, and they always found him to be pretty good on things of that nature. So are they wrong uns? No. Are they sugar daddies? Which is also something perhaps we should be asked. They're not that either. Their long-term plans for the club seem very difficult to determine, which isn't great. Are they looking to sell on? Are they looking to fund an attempt to get back into the Premier League? It's difficult to work them out. They're pretty inscrutable, these two.
I have to say, what an atmosphere you used to get at Swansea games in the Premier League. I've stood on the touchline as the teams came out at Swansea. The Singers, it's a stadium that deserves to be full. I mean, we all do at the moment, but that's a place when it's going well. Mark Ridley, our penultimate question, and this is an interesting one. It's probably one that we've all kind of thought about at some time. Mark Ridley asks, if a club makes an international transfer, I take it the currency used is that of the selling club. For example, Jadon Sancho at Dortmund is priced at 120 million euros, which is around 108 million pounds. If Man United agreed that, would they get a preferential exchange rate, or does Ed Woodward pop into the travel agent with a paper bag like the rest of us and change his money up? Or says Mark, could they operate in dollars?
Well, if it's a major country in Europe, I suspect they will be expecting, as a selling club, to receive euros, because that's how they pay their wages. That's how they pay their domestic bills. And also, it gives them the benefit of certainty. So that would be the standard way of doing it. It could be that if the buying club wants certainty, they might negotiate a clause in the contract where the buying club has certainty. But what I suspect the buying club will actually do under normal circumstances is that they will have some forward contracts in respect of currency, so that they know exactly the right amount going in and out. In respect of Mark's other comment with regards to using a third-party currency, this is quite common in some countries which have more volatile exchange rates. Certainly, my experience when I was when I used to work in Russia was that somebody was always very keen to get my dollars from me.
Go on.
And it was always money well spent.
We come to, every time you mention, we come to a crossroads, Kieran. It's always intriguing to see which branch of the road we go down when we come to Moscow. This is a very obvious question, Kieran. We've just 3 weeks to go till Brexit, but will that affect transfer deals in euros in the next few weeks and months?
No. I mean, ultimately, I would imagine that all European clubs will be wanting to get their deals done in euros even more than before. I think the downside is that if there is a no-deal Brexit, the currency markets, which are starting to factor that in, believe that will make the UK economy weaker. It'll also make the Euro. There are no winners from a no-deal Brexit. So from an economic perspective, but I think the UK is likely to suffer more economically, which will mean that the pound will fall in value, and that will have upsides and downsides for British clubs. If you're buying players from Europe and the selling club is looking for a 40 million euros, 110 million euros for Jadon Sancho and so on, that means it's going to increase the costs to English clubs. Having said that, if those English clubs are also in Europe, UEFA pay out the prize money from their various pots in euros, which means that UK clubs will receive more money. So I think for the bigger clubs, it will be fairly neutral because they tend to do an awful lot of buying from overseas, but they do get the benefits of European competition. For our clubs, the likes of Brighton and Palace, it will probably be bad news. It will be more difficult to recruit players because we're moving on to the post-Brexit points-based system, and B, with a weaker pound, it's going to cost our clubs more money.
Okay, I'm trying to remain neutral on the Brexit subject, Kieran, because I understand there are people listening to this who think it's a good idea. So I'm keeping my tone as neutral as possible while making it plain exactly what I feel. It's not the BBC. We're entitled to our opinions, Kieran, which are correct. Spencer Pritchard asks our final question, and Spencer wants to get his head completely around a subject that has been slightly perplexing on the pod recently, and that is loans with an option to buy, or more specifically, loans with an obligation to buy, such as the deal this week that saw Matteo Darmian going from Parma to Inter. And it's a very simple question, but it's a very clever one, basically. Why not buy him now? We've talked a lot about this notion of an option to buy, but if you've got an obligation to buy, why not just buy him now?
Right. The reason for that, Spencer, is financial fair play. If you sell him now and there's going to be a big loss on the deal, you might want to push that loss into next year's accounts by putting him out on loan first. Similarly, if you're the buying club, if you commit yourself to buy the player, then you're committed to the amortization fee. So you might want to push that down the road as well. If we take a look at the strange transfer involving Kylian Mbappe, PSG initially loaned him, which meant that only the loan fee went through the accounts in that first year. And when they bought him 12 months later, which I think was around about 200 million euros on a 5-year deal, that's when the 40 million a year amortization fee kicked in for financial fair play purposes. So it is, in my view, connected to the opportunities to, I think manipulate isn't the right word to use, but I can't think of another word. So it's to do with financial fair play.
Massage? Can we go massage without you being led down to...
Oh, that's another rabbit hole.
Oh, well, my Lord. Okay, I've never had a massage down the rabbit hole, Kieran, but, feel free. It's shocking, isn't it, how two middle-aged men can make themselves laugh like this. I've got good news, Kieran, basically. I was trying to stop myself giggling then, just minutes after trying to be serious on Brexit. We have a policy decision we've made. We are going to carry on delivering the pod over the Christmas holiday period. And I mean very much delivering. We won't be recording it over the pod. These will be very much pre-recorded pods, but we'll be going out on Christmas Eve as normal, and then there'll be a questions one on whatever the Monday between Christmas and New Year's call. I never know what to call that period between. I'd normally go for the perineum. I believe Crimbo Limbo is what the young people are calling, but I'd rather stick with the perineum. But we'll be back with a normal pod. Well, it's not Christmas yet, but I'm just letting you know that we will be available over Christmas. Good luck with sneaking out of the 3-bubble front room to listen to it in the toilet. In the meantime, of course, our next pod will be on what day? Oh, Thursday. I'm losing track already. The combination of Christmas and semi-lockdown is really confusing, isn't it? Questions at priceoffootball.com is what you need to email if you have any questions on any aspect of football finance, or indeed Christmas, as we're coming up to that period. And I shall say goodbye, everybody, and leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Kieran Maguire for his normal goodbye message.
Well, first of all, folks, thank you for all the support. We've had some really nice words about the quiz. For many people seem to enjoy it. If you like the show, if you press that subscribe button on Spotify and Amazon, and if you could leave us a 5-star review, it doesn't matter what you say. It could be the Nolan sisters that you'd rather have presenting than myself and Kevin. It makes no difference to us. I know a story about the Nolan sisters, which I'll tell you after the show, by the way, Kevin.
It's probably the same one I know, but
And other than that, look after yourselves and look after your loved ones. I know we've turned a corner with this vaccine, but we're not out of the woods yet. So stay in your bubbles. It's a pain in the arse, but it's not. It's not people as I'd like to say as young as me and Kevin. We're actually quite old, but it's my mum, and it's our elders that I'm most concerned about. So look after yourselves, and we'll speak to you soon.
Well, it's also, Kieran, as you know, my 38-year-old cousin who passed away a few days ago. So it's not just old people. We're not there yet, everybody, but we will be. So in the meantime, as Kieran says, stay safe and stay well.